Good morning. Welcome to Market Monday for November 6, 2023. Last week, as widely anticipated, the Fed left rates unchanged at a range of 5.25% to 5.5%. Of course, its last hike being in July of this year, so clearly a pause for now, and its next meeting in mid-December.
Following up on last week's video where Chad was discussing the R word, recession, and to many folks' surprise, stock market returns both before and during recessions weren't quite as bad as it seems. Could it be as our economy and financial system has evolved that our ability to weather recessions has also gotten stronger? It appears recessions in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the average length of economic contractions where the economy is shrinking was just about the same length as expansions when the economy is growing. The data is from the NBER, the official arbiters of recession in the United States.
As time goes on, so does the length of expansions compared to contractions, now about double in the first half of the 20th century. And as we move into the post-war period after 1945, now expansions are lasting about 4 to 5 times as long as contractions. And since the early 80s, expansions are now lasting more than 10 times as long as contractions.
But it's not just the length, it's also the magnitude. Contractions are much less severe. In these periods here, GDP, the widest measure of economic growth, contracted 23% on average. Since 1945, these periods here, GDP falls by just 3.7% on average. And this includes the 19.2% decline during COVID.
But it's not just the magnitude either. It's also the time between contractions. Before the brief 2020 downturn, it had been over a decade since the last contraction ended in 2009. There were 6 years between the 2001 recession and the start of the global financial crisis in 2007. It was a decade between the end of the recession in 1991 and the dot-com crash and Twin Tower terrorist attacks in 2001. There was nearly a decade between the end of the 1982 recession and the start of the savings and loan crisis and recession in 1990.
Exactly. Since 1983, there have been a grand total of 4 recessions, or one every 10 years or so. As a reminder, here's what the S&P 500 stock market did before, during, and after those recessions. Global financial crisis, again, by far the worst, and brutally painful, no question. But not every recession is as violent as the global financial crisis. And in fact, most are not. Even so, it's human nature to think it might be. Isn't that how our ancestors survived? The ones who didn't pay attention to the rustling bushes, even though most of the time it was just the wind, didn't survive. We are all descendants of those survivors.
But it's not just human nature. It's the media and the social media being master manipulators of our human nature. Look at this. The Economist magazine publishes this chart that tracks sentiment measured by surveying people and actual economic data over time. We can see that, yes, consumer sentiment tends to fall during recessions. Makes sense. Lo and behold, consumer sentiment also becomes more optimistic during economic expansions. Got it. And in fact, sentiment tracked very closely with the actual economic data.
Until it didn't. Happened precisely at COVID. After COVID, this is the actual economic data, and here's sentiment in light blue. Just gloomy. And until a few months ago, the worst ever. Worse than COVID, worse than global financial crisis, dot-com and Twin Towers, etc., etc. So despite our economy and financial system experiencing shorter, less severe, and fewer contractions, our sentiment is gloomier than ever.
And next week, we'll continue exploring this gap between sentiment and reality further. But for today, we'll leave you with the 15 billionaires who have lost the most billions so far this year. Have a great week.